Bastille Day, the bond between American flyers of World War II and the French village near Paris. The stained glass windows are back.
The town was so poor that people could not afford to put the...
Later this month, a group of American veterans from World War II will be going to France for a celebration. In the small town of Remy, north of Paris, the last time they saw it was from the air. They were part of the Allied campaign to drive the Germans from France. The French have never forgotten the German occupation, and this group of Americans has not forgotten Remy. Here's ABC's Sheila McVicker.
In 1944, Houston Lee Braley was a 22-year-old fighter pilot flying over Nazi-occupied France. His closest friend was a pilot from North Dakota named Roy Blaha.
I don't think a month goes by that I don't think about our relationship as buddies and friends and living a life flying together.
On August 2nd that year, they took off on another mission.
The clouds lifted, the sun was shining nice. It was just a good day for doing a lot of strafing.
Their target, the French village of Remy. There was a German train parked just outside of town, and German soldiers everywhere. The French were thrilled to see the American planes. People were so excited, he says, they were waving at the planes just out of joy. The pilots came in low and opened fire on the Germans. There was a great explosion. An explosion that everyone in the village over the age of 60 can still describe. The German train had been loaded with the high explosive nitroglycerin. Dozens of German soldiers were dead. The town was in ruins. Rooftops, doors, windows, all blown in. The stained glass windows of the 13th century church destroyed. And a plane, flown by Houston Lee Braley, caught in the blast.
He gave his life there in a farmyard. There were no goodbyes. Every flight is a goodbye, because you don't know.
2 women from the village found his body and wrapped it in his parachute. Later, in an astonishing act of bravery, the villagers walked past the German troops to pile flowers on the American pilot's coffin. The Germans were furious. Their commander warned that anyone who went to Houston Lee Braley's funeral or continued to pay tribute to him in any way would be deported and sent to a concentration camp. But every day, there were fresh flowers on his grave. I went to the fields and picked a bouquet, red, white, and blue, he says. A German sentry at the cemetery gates grabbed it from me and screamed at me to leave. After France was liberated, Roy Blaha went to Remy. He found the cemetery where his friend was buried and heard the story of how the French had honored him.
Well, I was amazed. I couldn't believe it. And they said, we honor him. He gave his life for our cause.
Over the years, Remy was rebuilt, except for those stained glass windows in that 13th century church.
The town was so poor that people could not afford to put the windows in. We felt that if we put the nice windows back in, this would show appreciation for what they did, their heroic actions.
The veterans called it their last mission. They raised nearly $200,000 and commissioned new stained glass windows. Now the church in Remy is again bathed in a rainbow of light. We still talk about those pilots, he says, the soldiers who had no ties to France, no reason to be here, but to share their ideal of liberty with us. Sheila McVicker, ABC News, Remy, France.
Finally tonight, a love affair between a little town in France and the American soldiers honored as heroes. ABC's Sheila McVicker reports now from Remy, France.
Today in Remy, they remembered what happened 56 years ago, as if it was yesterday. The memories still fresh, the emotions still raw. This is a story of people, American and French, veterans and civilians, who believe they have much to thank each other for. They gathered their families together for the first time to tell the stories and share the history.
I personally want to thank the people of Remy for their kindness and their courage.
Roy Blaha was a fighter pilot flying over Remy on August 2nd, 1944. With his squadron, he attacked a German train just outside of town. What the American pilots didn't know was that the German train was loaded with nitroglycerin. It exploded with such force that the rails and sleepers went flying and the sky turned black. The town of Remy was in ruins. The stained glass windows in the 13th century church shattered, and a pilot, Houston Lee Braley, was dead. A young woman found the pilot's body. The Germans were furious, she says. They threatened to deport us. We buried him with honor anyway. And people continued to pile flowers on his grave. It was the only way, she says, that we could pay tribute to this man for giving his life for us. But the American veterans said it was they who owed a debt of thanks to people who risked their lives to honor their comrade. So with flags and bands and anthems together, they finally reached the 13th century church to dedicate new stained glass windows, windows the veterans raised the money to pay for. And there was one more person to thank, the woman who secretly sewed the now faded flag the village used to welcome American soldiers when they were finally liberated. For her, the flag that flew atop the dome of the Capitol this July 4th. And all she could say again was thank you. Sheila McVicker, ABC News, Remy, France.
And that's our report tonight. You can visit our website, the weekend page at abcnews.com. We do like hearing from you. Tomorrow on This Week with Sam Donaldson and Cokie Roberts, Republican vice presidential candidate Richard Cheney, and an exclusive interview with the nominee's wife, Lynn Cheney.
Finally this evening, another chapter in an already memorable story, which begins in World War II. In the summer of 1944, as the Germans were retreating from France, an American pilot attacked a German munitions train in the town of Remy, north of Paris. In the devastating explosion, much of Remy was damaged, and the stained glass windows in the 13th century church were shattered. The American pilot was killed.
The Germans were furious. We buried him with honor anyway, and people continued to pile flowers on his grave.
Remy was liberated later that year, and in time, the village was rebuilt. But there was never any money to pay for new stained glass windows in the ancient church. And then in 1994, members of the U.S. fighter squadron, which had attacked the Germans in Remy 50 years ago, learned how the villagers had risked their lives to honor their fallen comrade. The American vets raised $200,000 to pay for new stained glass windows. In July of 2000, villagers and veterans celebrated together Remy's new rainbow of light. There was money left over. Remy thought they would buy an organ for the church as well. And then came September 11th.
We asked ourselves, should we continue with this project when there are so many people in distress?
That's right, Remy is sending the leftover money, $65,000, to the Twin Towers Fund in New York City.
The people of Remy, we had to do something. We had to do something for the Americans that were in pain.
In California today, one of the veterans, Manuel Casagrande, was amazed.
My God, I mean, how good can people be? These people have suffered through the years with many hardships, and here they are throwing money at us.
It is a lot of money for a little French town. They must have very good memories about Americans. That is our report on World News Tonight. Tomorrow on the broadcast, the musical